In this video, I want to introduce you to the key characteristics of organisms found in kingdom fungi. All fungi share certain characteristics. They are eukaryotic cells, so they have a nucleus and various other membrane-bound organelles. They have cell walls, but they are cell walls made of chitin, which, although it is a carbohydrate, is different than the cellulose we find in the cell walls of plant cells. Most fungi are multicellular. The ones that are unicellular we typically just call yeasts. Most fungi are decomposers. That's their main role in the ecosystem, but some fungi are parasites, and there are even some that are pathogens to plants and animals and humans. And then fungi will reproduce using spores. The cells of fungi are called hyphae, and they actually form thread-like strands, as you can see over here in this picture. These hyphae will connect together to form a larger structure known as mycelium, and mycelium is actually the main body of the fungus. It is the fungus itself, but because it's usually hidden underground, we don't tend to see it or notice it. What we do notice are the reproductive structures or the fruiting bodies that stick up above the ground. So things like mushrooms or puffballs or even the little sporangia that are hanging out, sort of like the fuzz you see on mold. Those are very visible, but those are not the whole fungus. In fact, they're kind of the end stage of the fungus because they contain the spores. The real body of the fungus is hidden. The bottom right picture on this page is showing you the mycelium, these thread-like white strands that we see here mixed in among the wood chips. Of course, the mushrooms on the upper picture are what we're most familiar with and what we tend to think of as fungi. But the mycelium is what's making up the real fungi. Both the fruiting bodies and the mycelium are composed of hyphae, of those fungi cells, and we'll be looking at them in the laboratory as we do some dissection of mushrooms. Fungi have a feeding technique that's known as external digestion. They release from the tips of the hyphae digestive enzymes. Enzymes can break down the organic matter that's then found in the environment all around the hyphae, around the fungus itself. And once those organic matter, whatever it be, dead leaves, dead organisms, dead wood chips, once it has been digested, that's what digestion means, broken down, then these key nutrients are absorbed into the cell of the fungus. So it doesn't take things in for food. Instead, it digests stuff on the outside and absorbs those broken down pieces. Some unusual fungi are actually carnivores. Most are decomposers, but there are a few carnivores that feed on nematodes. Nematodes are microscopic roundworms that are an important part of the ecosystem. They're in the soil, and there are many, many species of it. And there are nematode trapping fungus that capture and kill these tiny worms with special modified hyphae that act as various kinds of traps. Some traps are sticky, but the ones that I have over here in the picture actually look like little lassos that trap the nematode. Once the nematode slides its round body through the circular hyphae, the hyphae will tighten up like a noose and grab the nematode, and then by releasing the digestive enzymes can actually digest and absorb the nutrients from that worm. So it is a little interesting that you have a fungus that acts as a trapping organism. As I've already mentioned, fungi reproduce by spores, and spores are particular cells that can develop into hyphae. There are several different structures that will make the spores on any particular fungus, on any particular species of fungus. So spores can be created directly on the hyphae. The type of fungus that makes the drug penicillin, which is known as penicillium, the hyphae is where the spores are formed. So this illustration here is showing some strands of hyphae, and then on the end you can see these little round structures. Those are the spores. You also can find species of fungus where spores are made inside a structure called a sporangium. And the sporangium is illustrated here with this particular fungus, which actually, here's the spore on top, and it uses water pressure to shoot these spores a long distance away from that particular fungus. They're very interesting the way they sort of shoot off their spores like miniature cannons to make sure that those spores have a new piece of ground to land on to develop into a new fungi. And then finally, spores will develop in fruiting bodies. As we mentioned, mushrooms are the most familiar type of fruiting body, and the spores will form on most mushrooms in gills, which are found under the cap. The cap is the top here, and we'll be looking at some mushroom gills underneath in lab. This mushroom is a deadly one. It's not one that you want to eat. Be very careful about brightly colored things. This particular illustration uses a mushroom to talk about the life cycle of a fungus. So here we see the gills, the spores are being formed underneath the mushroom. They're being released, all these little dots. And so if we do a close-up, we see some of those spores are female. They're called plus. They're given the designation plus. We don't use male and female with fungus. We use plus and minus. So plus is female, minus is male. They develop into hyphae that are either plus or minus, and then these two need to combine together. It is sexual reproduction. Once they combine, they make the kind of hyphae that will grow into mycelium, these long thread-like strands. At a certain point in the life cycle of mycelium, the fungus decides it's time to build the fruiting body from the hyphae, and so it just starts as a small bud to begin with, and then eventually will take on that fully formed mushroom look and grow and develop new spores underneath the cap, which will then be released to repeat this cycle. And then last, I just want to go over to emphasize again that most fungi exist in the ecosystems around the world as decomposers. Their job is to break down dead organic matter using external digestion, both for nutrients and energy for the fungi itself, but also then, of course, some of the other organisms around that fungus, especially other plants, are going to be able to take advantage of that external digestion. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the second video for this unit. Most fungi require a fairly moist environment and warm temperatures. They're comfortable sort of in temperate environments, but a few species can tolerate high salt or high sugar or very dry environments. Interestingly, the enzymes that are used to digest organic matter can also digest unusual substances such as cloth or paint or plastics, which is why you sometimes will see fungus growing on those substances, which if we could harvest that technique might give us a way to help recycle some of those waste products that we have. When we talk about fungus, sometimes we use the word mold, and mold is not a specific species of fungus. It's just a general term for some fast-growing fungus, which appears very fuzzy when you look at it because it has many fruiting bodies sticking up. An example of that would be the mold that grows on bread. So we have a picture here of very moldy bread. You can see several different colors of mold. If we look at the darker mold under the microscope, rhizopus, we'll see it looking something like this. This type of mold produces spores in sporangium. So that's these little black circles on here are just filled full of mold, and you see they're kind of standing on stalks, kind of like a field of lollipops, actually is what it looks like under the microscope. And so all of these sporangium are full of full of fungus spores. If you happen to have a mold allergy, your body is reacting to these spores that you have inhaled because the spores, of course, are released into the air. As you breathe in the air, those spores enter your body, and then your body will respond to it. If it responds a little bit violently, then you are having an allergic reaction with sneezing and running noses and itchy and such. But you're not really reacting to the mold. In this case, it's not affecting you directly. It's just your body is reacting to as if it is a foreign invader. So in summary, fungi are multicellular organisms with cell walls that have chitin as the carbohydrate that keeps them nice and sturdy. Fungal cells are thin and tube-like in structure, and we give them their own name called hyphae. A mass of hyphae called the mycelium is the actual body of the fungus, but we usually don't see it because it's hidden in the decomposing material wherever that fungus is growing. The most visible part of the fungus is usually the fruiting body or the reproductive structure, which contains the spores that will go on to grow new hyphae. Fungi use external digestion to break down materials in the environment and then absorb the nutrients into the cells of the fungus. And lastly, fungi are important decomposers that help recycle nutrients in the ecosystems.